UPN Narrator News has partnered with Adidas to bring you custom clothing for all occasions. The material is amazing and they have fits for all body sizes.
Let's stop pretending this is subtle. Let's stop pretending this is accidental. Let's stop pretending this is healthy. Reform UK is being colonised by political turncoats, not rebels, not reformers, not builders, turncoats. People who already proved publicly that loyalty means nothing when circumstances shift, and yes, I'm going to name them. Lee Anderson, Nadim Zahawi, Danny Kruger, Jonathan Gullis, Chris Green, Leah Nisibi, Ben Bradley, Nadine Dorries, Adam Holloway, Andrea Jenkins, David Jones, Marco Longhi, Maria Caulfield, Malcolm Offord, Laura Ann Jones, Robin Hunter Clark. That isn't diversity of perspective. That isn't ideological richness. That is a pattern of behaviour. These are people who spent years inside the Conservative Party, defended it, promoted it, benefited from it, built careers within it, justified its failures, protected its leadership. And then the moment the brand collapsed, the moment their careers stalled, the moment their relevance began to fade, they didn't stand their ground. They left. Not when it was brave. Not when it was principled. Not when it cost them. They left when it became convenient. That's not evolution. That's not moral growth. That's self-preservation dressed up as conviction. You do not spend a decade inside a party and then suddenly discover overnight that everything you stood for was wrong. What you discover is that your strategic position has deteriorated and you need a new platform. That's not reform. That's career management. And if that makes anyone uncomfortable, good. It should. Because it reveals something crucial. These people are not anchored to principle. They are anchored to opportunity. That's what makes them turncoats. Not because they change their minds, but because of when they change their minds. Timing is character. They didn't leave when it was costly. They didn't leave when it was lonely. They didn't leave when it would have shown courage. They left when their seats were gone, their influence declined, their future inside the party evaporated, the Conservative brand became toxic. That's not rebellion, that's evacuation. And now we're supposed to believe these are the people who will form the moral spine of reform. Be serious. A party full of turncoats is not a movement, it is a waiting room. Reform sold itself as an alternative to the political class, a rejection of career politicians, a rejection of Westminster culture, a rejection of opportunism. So explain the reality. Former MPs, former ministers, former party operatives, former insiders, former beneficiaries of the very system they now posture against. This isn't insurgency. This is political recycling. You do not dismantle a broken culture by importing the people who were shaped by that culture. You do not create a new political ethos by filling your ranks with people trained in the old one. You do not build credibility by recruiting people whose defining public act was abandoning the last thing they swore loyalty to. What you build instead is instability. Because a party built out of turncoats does not develop loyalty culture, it develops transaction culture. People don't ask, what do I believe? They ask, is this still working for me? That's fatal to any serious political project. Movements are built by people who stay when the cameras turn off, not by people who arrive when the spotlight turns on. Reform is increasingly populated by the second category, and that makes it brittle. Loyalty is not a vibe, it is a behavioural history. There is a reason real political movements distrust defectors. Not because people can't change, but because behaviour reveals incentive structures. If someone's political identity changes only when the conditions become unfavourable, that tells you their guiding force is not principle, it's advantage. That doesn't make them criminals. It doesn't make them monsters. It makes them unreliable. Unreliable people cannot form the backbone of a serious organisation. Because when the next shift comes, when reform hits turbulence, when internal power struggles emerge, when another platform offers better opportunity, what do you think happens? Do these people suddenly become paragons of loyalty? Or do they do what they've already demonstrated they will do when conditions change? They move again. That's not cynicism. That's pattern recognition. A political project that fills itself with people whose defining feature is flexibility of allegiance is building in its own collapse, not emotionally, structurally. Then there's the London hypocrisy. Let's talk about the part nobody wants to handle honestly. For years, Reform's orbit, its commentators, its allies, its ecosystem has attacked Sadiq Khan using language that went far beyond policy critique. Not just policing failures, transport incompetence, governance problems, but language about identity, culture, symbolism, what London has become, what London represents, whether London is still recognisable. That wasn't accidental, it was deliberate, it was emotionally loaded, it was designed to tap cultural anxiety. Everyone in political media knows this. Everyone. Then enter Laila Cunningham, former Conservative, now Reform. Another transfer rather than a grassroots figure. Another arrival via defection rather than construction. And suddenly the tone changes, suddenly identity doesn't matter, suddenly symbolism doesn't matter, suddenly the cultural critique evaporates, not because of growth, not because of moral evolution, but because the narrative became inconvenient. That is the same instinct as the defections. Use the frame when it benefits you, drop the frame when it harms you, shift when pressured, adapt when exposed. That is not principle. That is shape-shifting opportunism. You cannot spend years weaponizing cultural identity against your opponent and then pretend those frameworks never existed. They expose contradictions inside your own ranks. That isn't integrity. That's narrative dishonesty. It reinforces the broader problem. Reform is increasingly not guided by coherent values, but by whatever positioning feels advantageous in the moment. Which again is exactly the behavioral pattern you see in Turncoats. Turncoats don't build, they transition. There is a psychological difference between founders and arrivals. Founders endure ridicule. They take risks when there is no reward. They build slowly. They commit long before success is guaranteed. Arrivals appear once the project looks viable. They join when there is something to gain. They attach when visibility exists. They move when opportunity appears. Reform is increasingly populated by arrivals, not builders, not loyalists, not people who bled for the project early. People who looked around, saw the political market shifting, and adjusted their alignment accordingly. That is not loyalty. That is career agility. And career agile people do not become suddenly loyal when they change platforms. They remain career agile. They simply apply the same logic to a new structure, which means the moment reform stops serving their trajectory, they will leave again, because that is who they have already demonstrated themselves to be. A party built on turncoats becomes a platform, not a cause. What begins to happen when you attract this profile of person is predictable. The party stops asking, what do we believe? What principles define us? What ideology holds us together? And starts asking, who brings attention? Who brings followers? Who gets headlines? Who expands the platform? You stop cultivating depth. You start prioritizing visibility. You stop building loyalty. You start managing optics. You stop forming coherence. You start accumulating personalities. That is how movements die. Not explosively, quietly, internally, structurally. They become vehicles instead of causes. Brands instead of philosophies, stages instead of projects, and vehicles eventually get abandoned when a newer one looks more promising. The truth that makes people uncomfortable. You cannot build a serious political alternative out of people who already proved that allegiance is negotiable. You can build noise, you can build controversy, you can build short-term momentum, but you cannot build trust, and trust is the only currency that actually matters long-term in politics. Voters may tolerate incompetence, they may tolerate hypocrisy, they may tolerate failure, but they do not invest belief in people who look fundamentally unreliable. And right now, reform increasingly looks like a party whose most visible new figures are defined not by what they've built, but by what they've abandoned. That is not inspiring, that is not credible, that is not durable. Reform UK had the opportunity to be disruptive, to be genuinely different, to build something outside the decaying political class. But if it continues filling itself with turncoats, people who arrive only when convenient, who leave when inconvenient, who shift allegiance when the wind changes, then it will not be remembered as a movement. It will be remembered as a transitional platform, a career stopover, a waiting room for political relevance. Not because of enemies, not because of sabotage, not because of unfair treatment, but because it chose to build itself on people whose defining trait is flexibility of allegiance rather than depth of commitment. Movements are built by people who stay when they lose, not by people who join when it looks like they might win. Right now, reform is increasingly defined by the second group, and that is the foundation of collapse. Not left, not right, just real.